fiddler and you the time. Please, please let me dream of you just one more time.
Well, it's not written here, so. My name is Morten, and I'm playing the guitar at the moment, which is pretty new to me. What I'm here to do is actually to talk about where the whole thing started for me, which was many years ago now, early influence. Probably the first thing I can remember was the Simon & Garfunkel song called Bridge of the Troubled Water. And that's the first real emotional moment for me. I was probably 10, I think. You probably all know it, but those of you who do will enjoy it yet again, and those who don't, it's about time you see it.
Troubled water, I will ease your mind.
Simon & Garfunkel for you there. Next thing I remember listening to and getting into, in fact more actively into, was Johnny Cash, because by that time I discovered that I had balls somewhere down there, and Johnny Cash with the depth of his voice kind of fascinated me, so I started to cultivate my own voice to try and do some of the same. The album I was listening to around that time, I believe, was called Man in Black. It's a long time ago now. He had a song out about a year ago, I think, which also very much reminded me of the guy, and I'd like you to hear that now. This is the man, the same one, all through the ages, Johnny Cash.
Around, Delia's gone.
Now, one of the most important bands, probably throughout my time, would have to be the Doors, because they bring something entirely new into the picture with their powerful atmosphere, and with also without losing the authority, which is essential. They have so many good songs, and although they had a pretty short career in terms of the life span or whatever. Light My Fire is something we all know. That tune is something I'd like to hear again, so let's hear Light My Fire. It's me to the most powerful input I've had in my life musically, which was a song that somebody put on the record player in my classroom. I was about 17, I think. That completely blew my head off, and it's actually not been put right back on since then. This was Jimi Hendrix. Hey Joe was the track, and I nicked the record that same day. Took it with me home because I felt it was in better hands with me, and I never played it again. That's the funny thing. I couldn't somehow. It was too much. I wasn't there yet. I needed a lot of growing up. In fact, about 15 years, I think. But that had a tremendous impact on me, and I realized that there's so much more to this and it excited me because it would all come in time. Hey Joe is a milestone, certainly in my musical life. So let's hear it. Jimi Hendrix, which stood out in every possible way, and in fact, to such an extent that he wasn't, like I said, he wasn't part of my sort of everyday development here. I moved on to David Bowie for a while. I was fascinated with some of his stuff for a while, and it was kind of it was, you know, I've always been kind of mixed between moving towards the more popular scene of what goes on, which David Bowie belongs to, even though he's stretched it in an interesting way at times as well. and to the more primal side of things with Jimi Hendrix. But Bowie certainly meant something for a number of years. Well, maybe not a number of years, but for an intense period. And parallel to that was another band we all know called Queen, and Freddie Mercury's way of singing fascinated me. So I kind of jumped from Johnny Cash to Freddie Mercury, you might say, and my voice got really fucked up, and it stayed that way. I'm split between the two until I moved on to a blacker streak, which was the next fascination for me. But before that, I'd like you to listen to Rebel, Rebel, David Bowie. On to the black, interesting side. I actually had my head full of ideas. I wanted to start bands, and and I kind of felt I belonged on stage, and my head was full of all sorts of fantasies around that. But I somehow realized I couldn't get it together. I was seeing this finished product all the time, but I still hadn't learned to play guitar. I hadn't started to do any work at all. And I got fed up with my own way of just wandering around in my own head. I met a friend of mine in the neighborhood who I'd been fighting and quarreling with for throughout the years, because he was into black music, R&B, but very much blues, soul to some extent, but blues even more than rhythm and blues. And one day I just went up to him and said that, okay, I'm gonna get into blues now because I hate it. It's the silliest music form that I know. It gives me nothing. There's nothing in it. I think it's boring. It's dull. Show me that it isn't. Give me something else. And he just grabbed me by the neck and said, "You come here, and I'll give you all sorts of examples." And I went with him to his house. He pulled out 10 records and gave them to me, and I took them back home. He said, "You go and you learn." He said, "Come back when you've learned something." And I did that, and I joined his band and started to sing blues because I truly hated it. And I felt somehow that in there had to be something new for me to learn, because with that type of attitude that I had, I knew there had to be a lot of ignorance on board. And I was right. And it became a very important element for me, input in my own development, I suppose, my own deterioration. And I started singing blues, and sounded terrible until I quit. I nearly started to sound good when I quit. But by this time, these two chaps called Paul and Mags had asked me to join them and go to England and form a band, which I then did, you know, and that was the end of the blues for a while anyway for me. But blues gave me a lot, and just to give you a little taste here, let's put James Brown back on stage where he belongs more than most. Sex Machine, James Brown.